Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast. We bring awareness of sustainable health in the business hustle space. That's our podcast is for the high-performing, business-minded individuals who want to work with their biochemistry to achieve success and optimal health. It's Friday, which means it's time for friends sharing facts about health, business, and overall success. In today's episode, we talk to Emma Lowe, who will talk about the menstrual cycle and how you can harness the power of your cycle to achieve productivity and success. Emma is a she of many titles. She's a feminine empowerment coach, a menstrual health and sexuality educator, an experienced yoga teacher and continuing educator provider, founder of Essential Nature. Emma has taught and trained around the world in the fields of classical hatha and tantra yoga, menstrual cycle awareness, sexuality, feminine embodiment, Celtic spirituality, and other shamanic-based practices. With a background in arts, Emma has a first-class Bachelor of Arts degree as a published writer and has a past life in film and television, and is also a talented singer and songwriter. Emma brings creativity and an eye for profound beauty into all her offering. And an interesting fact about Emma, I couldn't get much out of her, but she did say that she can ripple her tongue and that she can also have a full body energy orgasm. Welcome to the Natural Health Podcast, Emma.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you for having me, Michaela.
I mean, with your background, that introduction does little to what, the experience that you have and what you're going to bring into this podcast.
I mean, I kind of feel like all of the things, they all intertwine to bring you to where you are in this moment. So
yeah, 100%.
My path has been varied, and yet it all seems to weave into what I offer now. So
that's amazing. Yeah. So there's not many people that say an interesting fact about them is that they can ripple their tongue and that they can have a full body energy orgasm. That's not many people's introduction.
I know. I find that question really difficult, though, as to what is interesting. That's kind of all perspective, right? I
think that's very interesting. I think that's that's very interesting. I mean, not many individuals can even have an orgasm, yet alone a whole body one. I was reading some statistics on one of your Instagram posts in regards to reaching an orgasm, and it's not many people that reach one during sexual intercourse or during, sex with an individual. So it's interesting what's happening these days around that topic.
Yeah, for sure. Especially for women and people with estrogen-based bodies, there's definitely the orgasm gap, as we, that post that you're referring to talks about, which is part of what I do actually, is to help women and estrogen-based bodies to be able to get there, because lack of education, amongst many other different things, led to a gap which needs to be definitely shortened.
Yeah, it's not really spoken about, and us as females, we don't really talk about it much at all, and it's not really out there, is it?
No, it's definitely starting to come out of the shame and pain and blame and embarrassment woodworks. But yeah, I mean, orgasm is such an important part of it's good for our health, for one, and yet, as we say, females, women, estrogen-based bodies, and I want to kind of try and use those different terms, because not everyone that's in a female biological body identifies as a woman. But for a long time, our narrative and our scripts around sex and sexuality are male focused, and how we perhaps reach orgasm might be a little bit different to how a testosterone-based body gets there, right? So yeah, it's definitely there's room for improvement, and actually it's quite simple once you start to understand sexuality, like the energy, the workings of the body. And, as it ties into the menstrual cycle, which we're going to talk about today as well, and kind of just being able to create a bit more space and start to listen to the biofeedback that the body gives us. And then we can all have more orgasms and, be more successful and thrive more in our creativity. Like, it's all interconnected, right? Like, sexuality is holistic, and in essence, it's mind, body, soul.
Yeah, 100%. And I know today, we're not talking about a female orgasm in specific, the topic, but I thought it was just absolutely brilliant to bring up. And, it is something that we all steer away from a lot because it's kind of like not really looked upon as a positive thing to talk about. But I love that there are people like you out there that are saying, no, this is healthy. And, and talking about it from a health perspective. I mean, if you don't have a sexual drive, a libido or an orgasm, there may be some underlying issues happening inside of the body,
Yeah, exactly. And, some of that might be connected to a hormonal imbalance. Like, I'll talk about maybe in a little bit how you have these cycles of sexual energy, of arousal within the body. And also a big part of sex and sexuality is to do with de-stressing. Like, in order to reach orgasm, it might not be that it's not that there's anything wrong with you if you're listening and you're not able to climax, to get into those peak states of orgasm. It might be because you are too stressed out. And, one of the main things that I talk to my clients and my students about when it comes to both your menstrual health and your sexual vibrance is to de-stress your life.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. But before we get into the exciting topic, I wanted to find out a little bit more about you. And I know I got stuck on your interesting fact and we're digging deep into it, and I love that. But I wanted to know, what have been the key turning points in your life to get to where you are now and what you're doing now?
I know. I sidetracked you with tongue ripples and full body energy orgasms. Good fact. Start conversations that perhaps you wouldn't otherwise have, right?
100%.
Yeah, for me, I guess like I came from a creative background. I came from working in film and television for close to a decade, and I was very much on that Western path of what we see as perhaps being successful, of, hitting goals and driving the car and having the house and making the money and climbing up the ladder. And at the same time, I was also playing representational rugby. I don't know if rugby's much of a thing in Australia, is it?
Yeah, it kind of is. It's AFL's the key one, and then the rugby, yeah.
Quite a, for want of a better word, quite a like masculine sport. And I'm not saying that, I'm not gendering sports, but in terms of your energy output, right? Like, it's quite physically tough on the body, and the training regime is quite physically tough as well. And so within that kind of landscape, I was experiencing what we call dysmenorrhea, which is really painful periods, with lots of, different side effects within my menstrual cycle, which I didn't really understand, but it was accepted as that's normal. Periods are meant to be painful. So I went on the pill because that's what my doctor recommended. And then within that, it wasn't getting any better. So on one hand, like, the success and the life that I was living was picture perfect. And yet there was this disconnection to what was going on within my body. And that built and built and built those kind of two polarities of disconnection, and yet like kind of on the surface seeming to be hitting all these things that we're meant to do to look and be and feel successful. But it got to a point where my body wasn't just whispering these symptoms of hormonal imbalance, and I didn't have this language at that point either, right? But it got to the point where my body was screaming at me, and something deep within my intuition told me that the pill wasn't the right option for me. And so I came off the pill myself. I decided not to go back to the GP because every time I went back to the GP, it was, take pills, have a painkiller. Like it's just part of being a woman who bleeds. And yeah, I didn't accept that. And so I kind of went off on my own journey of wanting to understand my body, but also understand why I was actually really dissatisfied with my life, despite having all the things that I thought I wanted and the things that would please my parents. And, people working in film as well, people think, oh, tell me about this actor that you worked with. And that's so cool that you were on that location. And yet, on a deep level, I was really stressed. I was really burnt out. And I needed something to shift. And I ended up in Bali, where many of us end up for these, initiations onto different paths. And I went out there to do a yoga teacher training, your foundational 200 hours. As a retreat. It was a personal retreat. I had no intention of being a yoga teacher. I just wanted a break from the film industry and from my life. And during that teacher training, I found myself in a workshop about feminine, I think it was called the divine feminine. A big part of it was talking about menstrual cycles and feminine energy. And you'd maybe think that would be super inspiring. And actually it was really painful for me to sit through. I had this deep sense of oof, that's not how I'm living my life. And there was a pain with that, which sort of encouraged me, I guess, to then go further into that work and start to understand, what is my body's rhythm? What is my cyclical nature? How does that tie into my sexuality and maybe the shame that I hold around that? So that one workshop really opened up a lot of painful avenues of inquiry to explore. And that was kind of it. I mean, I never really went back to my old life. I spent about 4 years traveling the world, searching for, from different traditions, what it means to be in your body, what it means to understand the world from a more feminine perspective. And yeah, how through accessing the wisdom that's already within the body, how that can become a blueprint for your life. So it's not just a case of being on retreat all the time, there is a way of finding that balance, I guess. So yeah, again, many paths have led me to where I am, but it came from this place of deep disconnection, of shame, of pain, to now being in a place where I don't experience any discomfort around my cycle, and all from natural ways of balancing the hormonal system, which blew my mind. I didn't have that awareness about my body, about my reproductive system. It blew my mind that we weren't taught that in schools, that we don't talk openly about periods and sexuality. When they have such potential, not just to make you feel better, and be able to thrive, but also from a spiritual perspective, to connect to these expanded states of consciousness that many of us are seeking, maybe wrongly, but actually, the wisdom is in your body, and all you have to do is tune in and listen to what your body's saying in order to access those states. Yeah, so it blew my mind.
Yeah, wow. So gone from working in film and, people looking up to you and being like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky to be working on this scene with that actor on this TV show. It's And then you're just kind of like, you didn't feel yourself. You didn't feel like you were fulfilled, but everyone else thought you were fulfilled. And then you ended up in Bali. I mean, what a place to end up. Absolutely beautiful, absolutely brilliant to end up there to, I guess, awaken in a sense, and then learn all of these things about, you know, the feminine energy and feminine power. And then here you are today, you know, being the, you know, feminine empowerment coach and sexuality and passing the education on. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I mean, I guess your view of success would have changed throughout the years, and you touched upon that a little bit. You said, so what is your view of success now?
Yeah, I mean, definitely my view of success has changed. And I think the main difference is that rather than seeking external validation, you know, success is all about my own internal validation now. And yeah, it's not money orientated. It's not orientated around what other people think, even in terms of within my field, you know, like it's about really anchoring to my own truth and my own wisdom and finding the contentment, like having come from a place of being, you know, on paper, really like what people want, apparently, or what we're told that we should want.
Apparently. I love that.
Yeah. Apparently. But, you know, you kind of, for me, and I think for a lot of people, and especially women, there's this social empowerment that we've had, and it gives us this freedom to go for whatever you want in terms of success. And yet there's this part, or for me anyway, there was this part of me that was like, yeah, I'm socially empowered and I'm successful, and yet I'm not understanding my body. Like, and so there's like that piece that was missing. And now that's like the whole thing for me, is like, it doesn't matter how many students I have or clients I have. It's really about like anchoring to my truth and feeling content within that. If I help one person, great. If I, you know, have space in my day so that I can go out in nature and be present with that, be present with my loved ones, like that is the success that I want, more than, you know, status or wealth. And yet I think like also when you start to anchor to that truth, and when you start to let go of everyone else's expectations and kind of the formula of what success looks like, it actually starts to come back to you, right? It's like these principles of I mean, you could call it quantum physics or like manifestation, abundance. Like when you're in that rooted place of truth, you start to call in those people that are aligned with you, and also, yeah, your own unique abundance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I think it's so great that, you know, your success has shifted and now it's aligned. It's aligned with what you want to be doing. It's aligned with your values. It's aligned with you. And therefore you're able to assist so many more individuals, you know. I think that's absolutely beautiful when success is that for the individual. And then that means that you're able to share yourself and share your experience with others, and that's what you're doing here today. And talking about today's topic, right, the menstrual cycle and how we can harness the power to be more productive. Before we get into that, what if individuals are listening, what is your understanding, or what is the menstrual cycle, and why should we actually be more aware of it? I mean, it's not really taught as much in school. We get a little bit like, okay, you have to either wear a pad or a tampon when you get blood, and that's kind of it. And on top of that, people say, oh, it's going to hurt a lot and you're going to need chocolates. So that's kind of like the basic of what most people know about the menstrual cycle, and we're not that aware of it. But why would you say it's important to be aware of it?
Yeah. So firstly, yes, as you said, like our education or awareness around our menstrual cycle tends to be focused on menstruation, which is the physical shedding of the uterine lining, or the bleed that we get. And yet the menstrual cycle is actually a daily changing process that happens from bleed to bleed. And there are quite distinct shifts within the cycle in terms of your hormones, but also in terms of, how you feel in terms of your energy, your mood, your clarity, your sex drive, or your libido. So there's actually like a whole daily evolving process that's involved with it. It's not just the bleeding part. And most of us aren't aware of that. And within the framework in which we are told to live our lives, there's not a lot of room to fully allow for flow with the whole of the cycle. We tend to be on all the time, this rise and grind culture, the go, 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 go. And yet within the blueprint of your body, there is a time for action and a time for rest. There's a time for thinking and a time for being. There's a time for, dreaming, and then a time for putting that into action. And that's what the menstrual cycle can give you if you start to become aware of it. So, going into that a little bit more. So in terms of menstrual cycle awareness, your bleed is the start, your period is the start of the cycle. So that day one of heavy flow, that is the start of menstruation. And it's a time when your hormones are at their lowest. Your estrogen and your progesterone are at their lowest. So in terms of your energy, those listening, you might know this well. It might be when you're super sensitive, where your energy levels are at the lowest, where you kind of want to retreat from the world. And maybe the world doesn't allow for that in its current setup in your life, right? And that can create a jarring effect if you're trying to push through what's naturally occurring in your body. It builds upon that stress and overwhelm that many of us are already experiencing. And then once you've finished bleeding, you come into what's known as the follicular phase of the cycle. And that's when your estrogen levels start to rise a little bit more. Your uterine lining is starting to the endometrium lining is starting to rebuild. Your follicles are starting to mature in the ovaries. They're kind of competing for who's going to have the queen egg that's released during ovulation. And estrogen is many people favor this part of the cycle, the estrogen part of the cycle, because estrogen is responsible for you being more confident, for being more outward. It helps your nails and your hair and your skin glow. Apparently it makes your face seem more symmetrical, which apparently we find attractive.
Interesting one.
I know. I read that in Maisie Hill's Period Power, which is a really good resource for anyone that wants to, learn a bit more about this stuff. I don't know why we find symmetry attractive, but there you go.
I have seen studies on that we do find symmetry attractive. Like, I think I was watching a documentary on it, so it was really interesting, but I didn't know estrogen was responsible for us. That's an interesting part. So it's like, if you're going to be a bit more attractive, this is the time.
Well, exactly. And so when you're in this follicular phase, coming into the ovulatory phase as well, when the estrogen is rising, like maybe that's the time where you pack your social calendar, where you're going to go for your job interview, pitch the idea, when you go on a date, like that's the time in your cycle for that kind of social and work activity, right? And then you come into your ovulatory phase, which is when the egg is released. And if it's not fertilized in the fallopian tube, that will pass. But if it becomes fertilized, it becomes embedded in the endometrium lining. Pregnancy occurs, right? And at ovulation, your estrogen levels peak, as do testosterone levels, which is another, I think, common misperception that women and estrogen-based bodies don't have testosterone. They actually do. Like, it's a sex organ or a sex hormone present in all bodies. And so that's the time that your hormones are trying to get you laid. So you might find that your sexual energy is increased at that part of your cycle. And there's different ways of actually tracking that too, in terms of things that we never think about, like our cervical fluid. So paying attention to what's going on in your panties, your cervical position as well. In order to find that out, you might have to put your fingers inside of your vagina, which may be scary for some, but I can promise you it's not going to bite. And it can be really interesting to start to notice these shifts, even internally as well. So then you come into your luteal phase. So these are kind of the 4 phases. We've gone from bleed to follicular to ovulation to luteal. And in the luteal phase, in terms of hormones, the how do we say it? The follicle that released the most mature egg does this really cool thing where it turns into a gland. Like, it's magic. There's magic going on inside your womb. It turns into a gland and starts to produce a hormone called progesterone. And progesterone has a calming effect on the body. It can also have a heating effect on the body. So your body temperature switches between the estrogen and your progesterone phase of the cycle. And it's the luteal phase, that kind of after ovulation phase into bleed time, that many women and people with estrogen-based bodies struggle the most, often because we're out of balance. And going back to what we said about the bleed, because we're not allowing for the space that we need. So the energy is starting to decrease. You might start to feel that internal pull, that withdrawal from wanting to be busy. But it also can be the time when that inner critic comes out, which I definitely have a strong inner critic. So you might find that you're judging yourself more or judging others more. It might be also where you start to feel a bit more fiery in terms of, your tongue might not be as tight. You might start to snap.
No, that doesn't happen.
Well, and it kind of is what is perceived as like, the negative aspect of being in this body, right, is that kind of that downward energy and into the bleed. And yet, if we do, and I've seen this time and time again, I've seen it within myself, if you create a bit more space during that half of the cycle, you're not as reactive, you can respond a little bit better, and it really illuminates what is already not okay. It's not that your hormones are turning you into a wild witch. Not that I embrace the wild witch, but that it highlights the things that need to change. And so you can kind of view that part of your cycle as, like, I call it my review and edit phase, or it's harvest, right? Like, you are kind of able to reap the abundance of what you've already set up in the first part of your cycle, but also, what seeds do we want to plant? What are we going to weed out that's not going to come with us into the next cycle? And so, that's a very, very quick journey around the menstrual cycle. There's lots of, each phase has its own, distinct superpowers and shadow elements to it. But in essence, it's this blueprint, or like a medicine wheel almost, of energy. And when you start to live in flow with it, so when you start to create space during your bleed, you then have more energy available to fuel the rest of your cycle. When you create a bit more space in your luteal phase and that downward energy, maybe there's other things. It's not that you're not being productive, but actually that you're able to shift your mindset around what productivity and, even success is, so that you thrive more in the parts of the cycle that your body really sets you up to do so.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. You said it's like a minor or like basic explanation. I think individuals that are listening to this are like mind blown because they're like, this is more than I even knew. And like you said, they only knew but the menstrual cycle was the bleeding part, and that's it. It's just that we bleed and that's our menstrual cycle, but it's a whole 28, well, depending on the person, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30-day cycle of all these energy flows, of these ups and downs, of all of these hormone changes. And that's the biological things that are happening inside of our body. But then we're looking into all of the energy stuff that's happening inside of our body. And that is absolutely huge. I mean, there's so much happening and it's extraordinary. And thank you so much for explaining that to us in simple, but yet such effective, and in such an effective way. But I wanted to know, and I know a lot of women, they actually have a very negative association with their cycle, just about before they get their menstrual bleed. It's a very negative aspect to it. Like, they use words such as, I hate my periods, I don't want to bleed, or here comes pain, or something along those lines. So why do you think that happens? Why do you think so many women have this negative association?
Mm-hmm.
You're like, this is my goodie.
I mean, firstly, tying into what I was saying about honoring the natural energy that's occurring, we live in a patriarchal society that doesn't honor that feminine nature. And so that in itself is jarring. If you are trying to, rise and grind, if you're trying to be on the go all the time, you're not able to really tune in and harness the power of that cycle. And so we are combating thousands of years of living in this patriarchal framework, for one. There's so many different avenues. My mind's going. So yeah, that's one thing. And also with the patriarchy coming in, like there was a big shift around honoring the feminine in general. We lost our goddess cultures. Not that we lost them, but they were certainly like pressed underground. We've lost connection to an extent to ourselves as nature and the natural world that we live in, which, as within, as without, right? And vice versa. And that also ties into like how the female or the estrogen-based body is viewed. So many women have inherited beliefs that their periods are shameful and dirty. So many women have inherited beliefs that their bodies, their yonis, their vulvas, their vaginas are dirty, or that maybe it's not safe either to kind of access that wisdom and that power actually that the yoni holds. So there's a lot of unpicking even within that, and our ancestors, maybe many, many, many years before that, actually did honor these cycles. When we look back at ancient cultures throughout the whole of the world, there are references to sacred menstruation, to sacred sexuality, to honoring the feminine body, and somewhere along the line we've kind of lost access to that within the social cultural world in which we live. And I think also tied into the lack of regard maybe for the feminine and the female body, it has become commonly accepted that periods are painful, right? Like, take a painkiller, no problem. Suck it up, sister. And that is a problem in itself, because if you're accepting that pain is normal, you don't tend to celebrate that, for one, but you're also not. And if you're, your doctor's telling you that that's the case, you're not necessarily going to inquire down any other avenues about it. And I think it's something like, it depends on what studies you look at, but it's between 80 to 90% of women are experiencing symptoms of hormonal imbalance. So it's not, that's a huge statistic. And yet there's not a lot of research being done. There's not a lot of research being funded into why that's the case, or how we can, address this at the root cause of the issue, rather than just kind of putting a plaster on it. And so the narrative needs to shift. And it is definitely changing. There's definitely more conversations happening around periods. There's conversations around how to balance your system naturally, how to honor the body, and to see it as something that is sacred and worthy of your time and worthy of your own, devotion and honoring. But yeah, I mean, it's no wonder based on the crap education that we get around our menstrual health and sexuality. Those two things are kind of, you can't really separate them, based on the conditioning that we've inherited. And then when it's coupled with the fact that we're not getting the care that we need, and we're not getting the information on how to care for ourselves, I'm not surprised people don't want to have a period, or are trying to, take these avenues of using medication, which, I mean, the pill and hormonal contraception is a whole, perhaps other conversation that we can have, and I'm pro-choice around whatever 100%. People want to do for their bodies, and we're not informed about the effects that hormonal contraception has on the body, in terms of, it is a hormonal disruptor. If you're on hormonal contraception, you're not having an ovulatory period, even if you're still bleeding. You're not getting the progesterone part of the cycle. You're getting a synthetic hormone from your meds, which is called progestin, but it's not quite the same thing. And that has a huge, the studies are starting to come out about the health implications and the fertility implications on that. And fertility is a whole other thing as well with our menstrual cycle. We're told not to have sex. We're told it's really easy to get pregnant. And yet actually, within that menstrual cycle, which it's actually between sort of 20 to 40 days is considered a normal cycle, with 28 being the textbook. But there's only about 6 days within that period that you can actually get pregnant. And so what I find more and more is that people go from this idea of I have to be on hormonal contraception because I don't want to get pregnant. And then they come off the pill and they can't get pregnant. They have these epically painful fertility journeys. We're not taught about that in our education, right? And so, I mean, there's definitely some big issues to be addressed around why we don't enjoy bleeding. And on that, I could riff on this all day, but actually when you do start to slow down, when you start to address your relationship with your bleed, when you start to address your relationship with the more feminine aspects of life, the resting, the intuiting, the embodiment, the being, as opposed to constantly on the go and doing, there is some real magic that can happen during those phases where you really have this deep sense of connection to your own intuition. And for those that are so inclined, also a connection to the spirit or source energy, like a greater wisdom than just what we hold. And that, there's a sort of resurgence of what is called red tent culture, which is this, again, it's one of these kind of ancient ideas that women used to all bleed together. And so when it was the new moon, women would retreat and bleed together, and that it was this kind of time of the thinning of the veils, where actually the men would come to the women and ask for advice on tribal matters, because they were so deeply connected, not just to their own wisdom, but to the spirit world. which,
Wow.
you know, imagine that within our working world today, where women were actually like given the space to like go into dream time and access their wisdom and their power in that way. Like the world of success and productivity would absolutely like flip on its head in terms of what maybe we could all achieve collectively.
Yeah, wow, 100%. An interesting point that you said about the pill and like you pro-choice 100% is the fact that, okay, we know what it does on the biological level in our body, on a biochemistry level. It stops us having our period, our cycle, our bleed, right? But with what you said at the start, there's a whole energy aspect of our cycle. So by taking the pill, from my understanding, we are disrupting that whole energy, that whole feminine energy cycle. So we may be feeling less feminine. We may be imbalanced, not just hormonally, but we may be imbalanced as us, as energy, as an energy being. We're imbalanced because we're stopping that cycle that's been going on for years and centuries and who knows how many years of us having our menstrual cycle. So it's interesting just even looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of women that I work with, and, you know, from being in this field, those that are on hormonal contraception do feel a sense of disconnect from themselves. But I mean, we also need to think that a lot of people feel that too.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, there's no shame also in having followed your doctor's advice. Like that is the go-to for any, you know, hormonal imbalance with regards to the menstrual cycle. Yes, that needs to change. Yes, we need to have a more holistic approach to it. But yeah, people, women, estrogen-based bodies, people, have layers and layers and layers of disconnect, and so it's not an easy journey, perhaps, and yet all of the wisdom and intuition is already within you. You know, it's this journey of really coming back home to yourself. But yeah, the pill is, and you know, in my own personal experience as well, like I was told to take the pill, and I did for a number of years, not because of contraception, like that I think is the only reason that you should take hormonal contraception, if you know, but it didn't make my symptoms any less, and what it did was escalate my stress and I felt very anxious. I felt depressed for a number of years, and I thought that was just me. Like I thought that was something that I was doing, right? And it wasn't until I came off the pill and started to work with my cycle naturally that I was like, oh, wow, like that was cranking up my system, or that, you know, there was something because of taking that medication that first of all wasn't working for my imbalance, but that was, you know, maybe doing something far greater than that in terms of this being.
Yeah, 100%. You did mention also productivity within the cycle, and I wanted to know a little bit more about that. So, you know, the individuals, us women in the 21st century, we are busy, right? If we're busy in our personal life, if we're busy at work, we are constantly busy. Even at home, we're always doing something, right? And we want to be more productive, right? We want to be productive. But how can we harness the power of our period, of our menstrual cycle, to be more productive? What does this look like?
I think you have to really change your mindset about what productive looks like, for one, and kind of coming back to, we have this map, this inner compass of action and rest, of time to be outwardly productive and time to be inwardly productive. And you can't see, but I'm doing inverted commas with my fingers. So by resting more, it's kind of counterintuitive, right? By resting more, you have more energy and creativity available to you in other parts of your cycle. So rather than, and we can look to nature as well to kind of give you an idea of this, but we have these cycles of night and day. Like the sun is not always shining. We have these seasonal cycles. It's not always the heat of summer. Like we need the nighttime. We need the winter period just as much in order to be fully in balance, right? We cannot just inhale and inhale and inhale. At some point, we're going to have to exhale. And what tends to happen within the world that we live is that we are constantly inhaling and we're not allowing for the release, the letting go, the kind of, that assessing of what's working, what's not, because we're so busy. We don't have time, right? And so, I mean, first of all, you kind of have to have an awareness of what your cycle is. And so I recommend cycle tracking to people that are interested in this work, which, you start by on day 1 when you start to bleed. Maybe it's as simple as just writing down one word for how you feel and then doing that every day of your cycle so that you're getting a sense of where you do thrive and where maybe you need a bit more care. And generally speaking, we need a bit more care in that luteal and during our period phase of the cycle. Not always true for everybody. And that will have, if you say you are struggling in your follicular phase, so like after you've bled, there might be a different type of hormonal imbalance going on for you that needs addressed. But the first thing is really to get to know what's going on with your own unique cycle. And then from that, assessing where maybe you can make small changes. So, not everybody has the ability to completely retreat during their period. Maybe we've got children and jobs and things that we have to do, but there's little tweaks that you could make to your cycle to harness your body's natural rhythm. So maybe that does look like taking half an hour to yourself when you're bleeding. Maybe it means like changing your training regime so that you're not doing like high intensity workouts at that point of the cycle. And maybe, when you're in your ovulatory phase, that's the time you're going for your personal bests. And also in terms of like how you schedule your work life. If you have the luxury of doing that, I know not everybody does, but if you do have that ability to kind of tweak your working schedule, your luteal phase might not be the time to, as I say, like pitch a new idea or to do a big presentation and work. You might find that you're more clear and have more clarity and confidence in that estrogen part of the cycle. So in your follicular and ovulatory phase. And I also find that by creating, kind of going back to this idea of the cyclical wisdom, when you start to rest more and create that space, when you start to clear out all these things that we're holding on to, when we take that big exhale, it, as I say, like it fuels the rest of your cycle. And so you can be more productive in that phase, right? And it's, as I said, it's not a case that you're just like not going to do anything for half the month, as nice as that would be, but maybe it just has a little bit of a different flavor to it, so that you're like really smashing your creativity and your work life in one part. Maybe in your luteal phase, it's a bit more of like review and edit. Like I do a lot of writing, and in my luteal phase, when I can harness my inner critic, I love to get stuck into kind of like editing copy and stories and things that I'm writing at that point, because that's when my mind is kind of at its sharpest for that type of thing. When I'm in my bleed phase, like that's my dream time. It's not that I'm doing nothing, but I'm not trying to make anything happen. And when I'm not trying, often that's when I get these great ideas for, whether it's for a workshop or whether it's maybe something that just intuitively comes through about one of my clients, or maybe it's, a new creative project or collaboration. So yeah, it's kind of reframing that productivity and success from productivity is something that comes from having to like go. That's it's not our nature. And it also, when we come at it with that mindset, we tend to burn out, we tend to hit fatigue. We tend to feel really overwhelmed in our mind, so that we're not actually able to like really be in our full potential and power. So I am saying rest more to be more productive. But until people try it and they get a real sense of, okay, there's something in this, like on the mind's like, no, the world says it has to be this way. I've got much to do in little time.
Yeah.
But when you drop into that, like, and rest is such an important thing for our whole system as well, which, we talked about before we came onto the call about getting good sleep, getting, the right good amount of time, but getting good quality sleep. Like that's the same thing, right? Like we need to rest in order to be productive in our day. Like when we are tired and our organ systems haven't replenished, when we are taking in too much blue light from our screens, like it has an effect on these inner rhythms of our body.
Yeah, and that's why I'm wearing these funny glasses, because it is 9 o'clock here at night.
Yeah.
If anyone sees them, because blue light just interacts with the cycles. But I love that you said rest. By resting, we're going to get more productive. And hearing that, it doesn't make sense in most people's brain, because it's like you said, to achieve and be productive, we need to do, and we need to do, and we need to action. But we also need to retrieve and rest and understand our cycle. And that is the key. Going back to what you said at the start of the podcast, you spoke about understanding the cycle. Where are you at? What phase are you at? How are you feeling in that phase? And I'm thinking, I want to start this, because I already track my cycle, but I don't track the emotions. And I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea. And it's definitely something to consider. But whilst you were talking, I had a question. What if someone doesn't have their period, right? They're not, for some reasons, the period has stopped and hasn't come back for any reason. What are they able to do to be in flow?
Yeah, good question. And it's another one of these things that is kind of like commonly accepted as like, it's okay. It's okay to not have your period. And yet your period is your fifth vital sign. I have Lisa Hendrickson Jack's book in front of me, which is called The Fifth Vital Sign. It kind of goes in again it's another good point of reference for people that are interested in this. And so, in order as a estrogen-based body to be fully optimal and be in balance, our period is important. And so if you're not experiencing your period, there are ways of, maybe it's a chronic hormonal imbalance, and maybe there's testing that needs to be done in terms of your hormone levels and adjustments that you can make for that. But what I tend to find is that by starting to track your cycle, even without your bleed, so again, maybe that feels counterintuitive, but you could just start journaling or using an app. I definitely prefer the journaling method, because journaling is therapeutic in itself and kind of allows you to go as much as you want or be as short as you want. But the date, write a word of how you're feeling. It could also, your physically how you're feeling, energetically how you're feeling, emotionally how you're feeling, and start to keep that record. You can also tie in that mapping to the cycles of the moon, which is quite common within, the kind of feminine spirituality, the lunar, the feminine quality, and having your your bleed time energy around the new moon, and then ovulation being kind of akin to the full moon. It's not a fully it's not scientifically proven to help. And yet I found that people that start to track their cycles, even without their bleed, within kind of 2 to 3 months, might find their cycle starting to regulate or to start to come back online. So really, by bringing an awareness into your reproductive health is one thing that you can do. And I think as well, like often just having education around what is good for your hormones within your body and what brings them back online, right? Like, so sleep is one of the big ones, getting enough sleep, resting, de-stressing your life. Often stress is like one of the biggest hormonal disruptors in terms of your bleed, but also in terms of your, as I said earlier, like in terms of your sex drive as well. Things like balancing your blood sugar levels. People tend to want to avoid conversations around food and nutrition. And yet, like eating whole some food, trying to eat as close to the earth as possible so that you're not taking in chemicals or xenoestrogens, which are chemicals that kind of act like estrogen. Balancing the blood sugar levels, reducing your caffeine and your alcohol intake, another one that people don't necessarily want to do. And also, if you're like a super gym bunny, laying off that kind of really like yang exercise, not stopping completely, but just that can be one of the big reasons that women lose their bleed, is because of too much yang, too much masculine energy in their lives. So that's some ideas for kind of how you can start to balance the system.
Yeah.
And also coming back to hormonal contraception, like often women can find that after they come off the pill, that there is a period where, they experience no bleed, and that's common. And so it can take, from anywhere from 3 months to a year for that to regulate. And so supporting yourself with these natural ways to hormone balance, if that's you, is a really good thing for you to do.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I love all those tips and ideas. Absolutely love that. But one thing that you did mention, touch upon just a little bit, is in regards to the sex life and the period, your menstrual cycle. Mm-hmm. So how would you be able to schedule your sex life to get the most out of it, in a sense? I mean, it depends on all individuals, but from what you said to me, sounds like around ovulation time.
Yeah. I mean, your hormones definitely have this imprint of when you're most wanting to get it on. And yeah, around that kind of, and also, if you're in your estrogen based part of the cycle and you're just feeling a bit more symmetrical and like you're kind of maybe more wanting to be seen sexually, right? And yeah, once you come into that estrogen, or when you come into ovulation and you've got those surges of estrogen and you're really like, woohoo, I am at my finest. And your testosterone levels are peaking as well. Like, you could schedule that time to be with a partner or a new lover or with yourself. Like, let's not forget the magic of a self-pleasure practice as well. But I also want to be careful with that, because that would indicate that there's maybe only 6 days within your cycle that you're fully in your sexual power. And yes, hormones do play a big role in, as I said, trying to get you laid because of this biological process that's going on. And yet the biggest sexual organ, if you like, actually is your brain. So while arousal is this biochemical process that's going on, sexual desire comes from your brain's connection to the body and to the yoni.
And that's in so many individuals. We see our brain as separate to our body. So how are we supposed to connect the two together and have that pleasure?
This is a good topic. I think de-stressing, like, I don't know if I've said this enough, like de-stressing.
That's definitely one of your practical tips to take away is de-stressing.
Which, I mean, it sounds a bit fluffy when you say like de-stress, like what does that actually look like? But that will depend on each individual's life, like what is causing you stress in your life. Because when we are stressed, when we're stressed, we divert from enjoyment and pleasure, because if you've got low level anxiety or chronic anxiety, or if you're in that kind of like cortisol reaction all the time, you're not necessarily gonna want to get your sexy on. And so like addressing the stresses in your life and trying to create a bit more space within your sexual scenario, whether it's with yourself or with another, so that you're giving yourself time to kind of come out of all the thoughts that are whizzing around that busy mind and allowing yourself to drop into the body. So anchoring to your breath, anchoring to the sensation, the physical sensation that is arising, and slowing down as well. I read recently that the average sexual encounter is between 2 and 3 minutes. Like, no wonder women aren't orgasming. It takes us a little bit longer than that.
3.5, no, a little bit longer.
4 minutes. No, like, so it's being able to slow down and really like feel, I think is a big thing that we're missing. Because often, and again, coming back to that conditioning as women, we can tend to be in our heads a lot during sex. We can tend to be judging our experience. What do they think of me? Like, do I smell funny? Like, can they see that, like, beautiful round tummy protruding? Or even like kind of going into the other end of like trying to perform, because we have this idea embedded in us of what sex should look, sound, feel like. And so long as we stay in the head, kind of the pleasure of the experience and even those peak states of orgasm can elude us. So hormones definitely for sure play a role, but there's so much more to sex, sexual energy, and experiencing those deep states of pleasure and the expanded states of consciousness that orgasm can bring, than just having that surge of testosterone around ovulation. And
that is like a whole new episode that we're gonna have to do. Like, that is so intriguing and so exciting. I just want to ask so many questions, but I guess to wrap it up, I am understanding the practical tips to help individuals, help them understand their cycle and get productivity from the start. You did say tracking and understanding your cycle, but not only tracking it time-wise, but tracking it feeling-wise. And then de-stress, you kept saying de-stress, and sleep. Is there any other practical tips that you would think want to put in there in regards to incorporating to be in the flow and getting the most and being productive with their menstrual cycle?
I mean, I think starting off with the tracking and addressing what your relationship is to your bleed. That can be, because really how you treat your bleed is what will either, allow you to thrive or to set you up for a fall in the rest of your cycle. So kind of unpicking all these inherited, beliefs around pain and shame that our periods hold, and kind of if there's one thing that you can do to improve your hormonal health and your sex life as well, it is to switch your mindset away from that kind of common patriarchal narrative of of what we're told to believe around them, and to know that like there's nothing wrong with you, like on a deep level. Yes, there might be imbalance. Yes, there might be things in our lives that are blocking from us being able to access our vitality and our pleasure, but actually it's all already within you. It's not something that you have to search outside of yourself for, and to trust that, right? To trust the innate biofeedback that the body holds. Like the blueprint of balance is already there. The blueprint of accessing your creativity, of accessing your like most brilliant state of productivity and being, it's already within you. So I think that's aside from the obvious of like watching your food and maybe not smoking or drinking enough water, sleeping, like all those kind of things that we already know we should do. When you really start to listen to the body, it becomes less of another thing we have to do, and something that is just like, oh yeah, we've got this. Like we're a team. I'm listening,
Yeah, I love that. Working as a team with your body, which is the way we should be, but not just with our body, mind, spirit, soul, everything working aligned together. Thank you so much for sharing so much information, so much value. But to finish off, I ask all my guests, as this is the Natural Health Podcast, what is your best kept natural health hack that you may do every day, might do once a week, once a month, but it's your little thing that you do that keeps you nice and healthy?
I think, going back to how we started this interview, I think my best kept secret, not so best kept, is probably is pleasure, is allowing yourself to self-pleasure and connect to your body, yes, but also just in your daily life to take that moment to enjoy your morning tea, to pause and listen to the birds and let your senses be filled with kind of the pleasure and the wonder of life, which I think for so long I didn't, and for so many others, like we're so busy doing and trying to achieve that we kind of let those little moments pass by. So yeah, take in those 5 moments to yourself, to just be in life and in your own pleasures. Super, super important.
That's so beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. And it's sometimes easy said and hard done, but it is definitely something to take away and enjoy that pleasure and understand that I'm allowed to sit here and listen to these birds. I'm allowed to do this. I'm worthy of this. I can do this, and it's going to benefit me, and rest. I love that. Absolutely love that. So for anyone who's been listening to this podcast episode and is absolutely in love with you, Emma, and wants to know more, where can they get in touch with you?
So at the moment, you can get in touch with me via my Instagram, which is Essential Nature Yoga. At the moment, I'm going through a bit of a shift in the back end, but yeah, for now, that or by email is probably the best access point. And we'll see. We might have a new website launching soon with some pretty cool offerings. So stay tuned for that.
Beautiful. And I'll put that all in the show notes, and I'll update it once your website is live, and I'll put it in there. But look, you have blown our minds. You've blown our information about the menstrual cycle, the energy flow, orgasm, sex life, the feminine divine. So many little keywords that we've spoken about in today's episode, and the audience is so thankful, and I'm thankful for your time. I really, really appreciate you sharing your experience and your knowledge here with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, hi to you guys over in Australia and your warm weather as I sit in a very rainy Ireland in March. I'm
Beautiful.
looking forward to being able to travel again soon.
I know, we are too. Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you for joining us at the Natural Health Podcast. And remember, the missing link between failure and success is your health.